Conversations with Leaders for Aspiring Leaders. I am Brian Lass, and joining me today, the mayor of arguably everyone's favorite city. I know for certain one of mine. He is Mayor Jim Diodati, mayor of Niagara Falls, Ontario. And Mayor, I thank you so kindly for graciously lending your time here today.
My pleasure, Brian. Happy to be here.
Excellent. So I know for certain right off the get-go here, and speaking for myself, obviously not every day I get to sit down with a mayor, especially of a fantastic city like Niagara Falls. So as far as I suppose to get the ball rolling, the succession of events that sort of led to where you are right now, and I will tell you as an aside, in endeavoring to do my best, I guess, investigation skills, if you will, or, on LinkedIn, I noticed certainly prior to being a mayor, I believe it was sweet goods distributors. So certainly the chain of events, I'm very, very interested and curious to see, I guess it was about 11 years ago you decided to try to go for running for mayor. So kind of how it all went.
Well, it's not something I ever planned for, never thought I'd ever do. I was never really overly interested in politics. I mean, I was in student government a little bit too, among a lot of other things. I used to joke, jack of all trades, master of none. And, I played some sports, played some music, did some student government. Wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do, but I was kind of like, I'd equate it to going to the buffet. And you don't load up on any one thing. You get a little taste, and then you go back for seconds of the things that you really like. And I've always been entrepreneurial since I was a kid. We backed onto a park, so I'd be a bat boy. I'd help clean up the park. I'd cut onions for the lady in the cantina. I remember I'd fill a big pickle jar of onions and whatever, just to have a few bucks. I'd like to have a couple of bucks in my pocket. So anyway, I've over 25 years had lots of different businesses. The most recent one you mentioned, bakery distribution business, where we distributed sweet goods to all major retailers in Southern Ontario. And we brought in some notable lines like Little Debbie cakes out of the U.S., out of Collegedale, Tennessee. We brought in cream horns from Pennsylvania, Entenmann's and Thomason's out of New Jersey, Brock's Candy out of Chicago. I brought in fudge out of Quebec. I brought in pies out of Quebec. So all sweet goods. As a matter of fact, my wife used to say, from your lips to your hips. That's the business I used to be in. So I did that and dealt with all the major retailers, from the Walmarts of the world to whatever, set up the ads and help with distribution and loved it. But it came just the way my life lined up with my kids, the ages. I had sold that business and I was already on city council, and I made a decision. I thought, I'm going to run for mayor. And I decided at one point that I can follow anyone as long as I have faith in where they're going. And the former mayor, who I liked and I worked under and quite enjoyed working with him as the mayor, just some of the decisions I felt weren't the right decisions. And the way I look at it, leadership isn't about doing what's popular, it's about doing what's right. And it means you got to have thick skin. You need to understand it's not always easy. It's not a simple way to go, but the right decision. And I learned a long time ago, Mayor Riley was the mayor of Charleston in the United States. At the time, was the longest serving mayor in the United States. And I met with him before when I was a counselor, and he said, my best advice was that, he goes, some of the people that are going to try to take you off your path will be your friends, and the well-meaning, but taking you down the wrong path. And he said, and I thought, wow. So very insightful. I've come to realize that sometimes that's the case. So anyway, I decided that I wanted to use my entrepreneurial skills as a mayor. And I laugh because I feel like I'm the unconventional mayor, because I'm not a bureaucrat. I'm very impatient. I'll go around the clock all 7 days. I feel like I'm on a mission to move the ball forward and then get out. And I don't want to waste even a minute. Life is short, life is precious, and time is money. And I don't like wasting anybody's time. And I like words to count and mean something. And I don't like to just give words and lip service. I like to give action. So that's the kind of personality I am. And I transitioned from being an entrepreneur to being an intrapreneur as the mayor. And I'll probably go back to doing that again when I'm done being mayor, or when they're done having me.
Excellent. Well, certainly to that effect, I mean, the idea of getting things done, obviously indicative of probably why you, one of the many reasons why you realize the role you're in right now. And one thing I will say as a preface, the idea of, I know you mentioned from lips to hips, and I can tell you for certain there's probably many of us in light of the pandemic that can relate to that, the expanding waistband. But nevertheless, and admittedly, you sort of as well took us into the next realm that I wanted to get into. You touched upon the idea of what leadership means to you. And again, the idea of doing what's right, not necessarily what's always favorable, but maybe to take it one step further. And I'm not certain if you have one sort of distinctive caveat that, was always tried and tested for you as to what leadership does actually mean to Mayor Jim.
Well, I think the biggest thing is it's not just showing people what to do or telling them what to do, it's helping them become leaders. I think you need to mine for the miners. And it starts with a lot of things. Number one is most of the time people know the answer to the question. Oftentimes, I know when I first got into this role, and then the staff would ask me about something, and I'd say, "What do you think we should do?" And most of the time they know the answer. They just need the confidence to back up that answer. And then it got to the point now where they're great. And it's encouraging independence and follow up. That's the other thing. I don't just send something off and let it go. I send it off and then I go double check and see how it landed, because that's when you'll find out if something went wrong between the communication, between you talking and them listening, or some people just give lip service and they don't intend to actually do what they say. And then they start to realize this is my expectations. So I am going to follow up and I am going to make sure that it got done. And this is how it's going to work. And then you surround yourself with like-minded people who are all of the same mind. The other thing is I like to catch people doing things right. I don't like to be the gotcha kind of leader that, you catch them screwing. I like to say that this was great. Well done. Good job. Thank you. And I'll tell you, I learned from my dad. My dad's always been one of my mentors, because he gives it to me both ways. I know one thing, when my dad's talking, it's straight. And if he's calling me out, I screwed up somehow. And he's just as quick to pat me on the back, but he gives it to you straight. So I don't want all people telling me how great I am, because I'm not always going to do things right. Sometimes I'm going to screw up. And that's the other thing about being a leader. You cannot fear failure. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's a very necessary part of success. And if you don't fail, you just don't shoot high enough. So failure is okay. And I tell my kids all the time, I go, listen, I'm the biggest screw up going. I make screw ups every day. I add volumes and chapters to my book of fail. I go, but whoever makes the most mistakes learns the most lessons, and that will be the person that's going to have the most wisdom, and they'll be more successful into the future. I said, so don't fear failure. Look for it, embrace it, understand it's part of the process. And I said, but here's the key though. When you do screw up, own it. Own it. And if you do something wrong, apologize for it, learn your lesson, and move on. But don't cover it up. Own it. So that's kind of been and with my kids, I try to encourage them to go down. And kids, they know it all when they're teenagers, and then later on, hopefully they'll realize, yeah, maybe dad had a couple of good ideas. But I'm just trying to, and I don't like to give someone specifics. I like to give them certain ways of thinking that they can use like a cookie cutter throughout their life, whether it's with their own kids, their own business, their own job, their own, whatever their passion is, that they can learn certain fundamental skills. And I really believe there's some real basic fundamental skills. We can give them fancy names and phrases and do all sorts of neat things, but it always comes down to the basic: say what you mean what you say, look them in the eye, make sure your word means something. I'm old school. I like old school. I like the way it used to be when someone gave you the word, you took it to the bank. Where today it's like, well, my lawyer double checked and the word didn't exactly match up with, that's not my style. And I truly believe in karma. What you give, you get with interest. So make sure you put a lot of good out there, so you get a lot of good coming back.
Excellent. And certainly a lot to unpack there, a lot that certainly resonates with a lot of people, certain for myself, foremost, the idea of you either, I think that as the sentiment goes, you either succeed or you learn, I think is the statement. So certainly getting that F word, failure, if you will, out of the equation. And even to that effect, certainly one of your latter points, the idea of, I guess, as we climb the successive ladder of roles or rank or structure, it's not about being in charge, but rather, as the sentiment goes, it's about taking care of those in your charge. So certainly something that maybe some people in these perceived leadership roles get wrong and hopefully inevitably learn. But one thing I wanted to sort of latch on here, because, now we start to talk about the idea, again, of a leader and maybe creating an environment and ensuring that, your people are performing potentially at their natural best. So, I guess where I'm trying to arrive at here, certainly we as humans, being social creatures, we obviously respond and react to our environment. So as such, I suppose what I'm wondering, for someone such as yourself, obviously having responsible charge for so many various, arteries and avenues, if you will, in the public sector, of course, and speaking into Niagara Falls, do you think from that leadership perspective, it more so rests on, let's say, the shoulders of you or people in responsible charge to create this environment that's conducive to, let's say, good morale, motivation, growth, and things of that nature? Or do you think it's sort of a two-way street?
It's definitely two-way, but it starts at the top. And you set, it's kind of like the lead dog in a dog sledding. The lead dog sets the pace, and that's why the musher's got to have the right one out front, and you have to accept it, good and bad. And when things go wrong, you can't pass that away. You can't take the credit and pass the blame away. You got to take it all, and that's what leadership is. And I think it's being humble. I think it's really important, and you'll find I'm very self-deprecating. I try to make fun of myself before you get a chance to. And I always tell my kids, and it's so funny. One of the real important words I learned from one of my mentors, and I have many mentors, and people need to understand, mentor doesn't have to be some high-level business person or some coach. Mentor could be a former teacher, it could be an uncle, it could be an aunt, it could be a friend, it could be your barber. I mean, everybody's got nuggets of wisdom. So the first thing when I approach somebody, one of the first things that I see, and I know, like you, Brian, in certain ways, you're better than me. You're superior to me. You have better skills than me. So my goal is to extract that out and find out what they are and see how I can learn from you and how I can take a little bit of what you got, a little bit of your magic, and make myself a little bit better. So I think it's really important that you stay humble. And one of the words, this is the word, it's edification. And when you edify someone, and when I was younger, I thought, why? I want to tell them how great I am because I want them to be impressed with who I am. And I realized it's the exact opposite. There's so many things in life I've learned. It's the exact opposite of what I believe. And I think, how could I have got it so wrong? Because naturally I did this. So in other words, edification. So now I will spend my time when I'm on a call with our chief administrative officer and our head of economic development and our whatever, and we're dealing with international investors, and some of them are large that all your viewing audience would know who they are. And some of them are very famous. And we deal with a lot of very, very interesting people. I edify the heck out of the people around me, and I'd say how great they are. And why we're working, why I'm lucky to work with them, and why you're lucky to be working with them. And this is the team when I'm done, they're all 10 foot tall, bulletproof, and walk on water. and I'll tell you what ends up happening. They believe what you say, and they internalize, and they will rise to meet your expectation and your description of them. So, and then in return, it's amazing. Then they'll say nice things about me. And that's not why I do it, but it's a nice side benefit, because then they'll say, oh no, it's the mayor's vision or whatever. But again, I try to pass it off. And I always say, I'm just the window dressing. These are the smart people. And it's true. That's the other thing. Be humble enough to surround yourself with people smarter than you. And I learned a lesson a long time ago. One of my early businesses I used to have, and I remember the gentleman that owned the plaza that I was renting in. And he said to me, oh, you're a smart guy. You went to university. And I was like, yeah. He's, an immigrant, and, his English wasn't great. And he says, yeah, I only went to grade 8. And I said, oh, yeah. And then he said, yeah, he goes, so you're probably smarter than me, maybe. And he goes, but I'm smart enough to know that I have a lawyer that can do all my legal stuff. And I bet he knows more about law than you do. And I said, yeah, I guess he would. And he goes, and I have an accountant who probably knows a little more about accounting than you do. And I have an engineer who works for me. And this guy owned a lot of property, and he was very, very wealthy. And he humbled me very quickly in the most subtle way, but I got the point. And I realized here at first, I was right away, got my chest puffed out because, I went to university. I'm a smart guy. You realize, no, that means nothing. And even my parents, my mom will say to me, oh, you went to university. I said, Mom, you're smarter than I am. I said, you maybe don't have that piece of paper, but you're smarter. You've got some other wisdom that I can't even put my finger on, but and my dad, same thing. And I come to realize that kind of stuff. So if you can edify other people around you and you can stay humble, you're going to be a sponge to suck up all the goodness coming your way. But if you want to puff out your chest and you want to show how smart you are, people will prove you wrong. And I'd rather go the other way.
Absolutely. And I can tell you absolutely distinctively that sentiment truly resonates with me in my world. I mean, I've seen it firsthand, both sides of the fence. So we're most certainly on the as well as both being sharp dressers, we're both certainly on the same mindset as well. So it's definitely great to hear that. So I, maybe moving along and still on the same idea of puffing the chest out or maybe getting it wrong, if you will. And admittedly, this may seem like a bit of a loaded question, so certainly I'm not pointing this to any specific, sector or branch or person, none of that nature. But I guess as an overall statement, and at least getting your viewpoint on this, do you feel that there is a lack perhaps of true leadership overall within our landscape, and that can mean whatever it's going to mean for you? Again, not asking you to name names or sectors or whatnot. So in other words, the idea of people in these, let's say, perceivable leadership roles, more managing or being more of an autocratic style as opposed to truly leading. And with that being case, if perhaps that is more so what's happening, I guess what I'm getting at, do you have any maybe insights what we can do almost on a dime to get our perceived leaders and actually turn them into true leaders that lead?
Well, I think the key is leaders need to mentor other leaders. And as I said earlier, mind for the miners, because everyone is not a leader. Some people are in leadership positions, but they are not leaders, they're followers. One of my mentors said to me, if you think you're a leader and you're leading, look behind you. And if there's nobody there, you're just out for a walk. Yeah. And the whole message is, if you're leading, then there should be people following. And some people are very bureaucratic. Some people have the approach, tell me where you're going and I will lead you there. That's not a leader. A leader comes up with an idea. They don't need to always check the temperature and which way the wind is blowing. They already know, because they've already thought about it and then they made a decision. And now I've had people criticize me. Well, I've had them criticize me for absolutely everything under the sun. And it happens every day. And I'm okay with that, because that's part of the price of being a leader. It's like, you want to be at the front of the motorcade, then you're going to get bugs in your teeth. It's just the way it is. And if you don't want bugs in your teeth, go to the back. And if you don't want people taking shots at you, go to the sidelines, because nobody's criticizing the guy standing on the sideline. So you want to be out in the field playing? There's Monday morning quarterbacks all day long who could not run with a ball if their life depended on it, but they're going to tell you how you should be running with a ball. And that's just the way it is. Politics, business, it's all the same. You're always going to have your critics, just the way it is. You're going to have your buzzards come in after the kill and pick up their little bits and pieces. You got to expect that. So I think we need to help develop more leaders and show them. So it's been tough lately being a leader, I have to say. Number one is social media is an absolute double-edged sword. I mean, some people think it's the source of all information, which is sad, because it's a source of a lot of information, not good information necessarily. And also, it gives everybody and anybody a platform, including people that are not nice or that don't have a good agenda or motives aren't very nice, they're questionable. And so it's a double-edged sword, but it's changed, where before people could only reach you between 9 and 5. Well, now, and it'd be by phone or a personal visit. Now, I don't need to tell you, there's 101 ways to reach someone, and it's 24/7. You never get away from it. You can't go away on vacation, not have access through your phone or your smart device, your tablet, or whatever the case. Like, it's a different world. And add COVID to it. And COVID, I'll tell you, COVID, it started off in the beginning, people were fearful, and then it turned into frustration, and now it's turned into anger. And people want to be mad at somebody somewhere. They're just angry because by nature, we're ritualistic people. We like routine, and the routines have been thrown sideways, even for the homeless people. They can't go to that coffee shop they used to go to, or they can't panhandle where they like to pan. Everything's been disrupted. So people are angry, and they're reaching and they're lashing out at whoever they can see out in the target. And unfortunately, some of us are accepting the wrath of some of that. And it's tough. And some people say, this isn't for me. I didn't sign up for this. I don't need this. And some days it's tough. But as long as you've got coping mechanisms, and I'll tell you, I work with other leaders and we mentor each other. And I'll tell them, here's what I do. And like for me, I love going to the gym. Now, right now the gyms are closed, but that 1 hour, 3 or 4 days a week, it's my drug. And it lets off all my steam. It releases the right hormones that I need, focus on the serotonin. And I'm in a much better place, get rid of the cortisol, if I can just do that. That's my drug. Going for a walk, meditating and praying. I love to do it. I love outside. And that for me does the trick. And everyone's got to find their thing so that you can come back. It's like every once in a while, your device, you have to do a hard reboot. You have to shut it off and turn it on. And all of a sudden everything resets and it's good again. So sometimes we got to do the same thing with ourselves. and make sure that we're in balance so that we're going to be effective, and work with other leaders, because it helps when you find out you're not the only one. And when you realize we're all getting treated the same way, you don't take it personal. And then when you look at, you realize where it's coming from, because you realize this isn't about me. Them saying these nasty things, it's about them and the situation they're in. And when you can do, again, realize, oh my God, it's 180. It's completely different than I thought. You come to realize it's not what you thought it was. Don't take it personal and stick to your mission because you've thought it out.
No, for sure. And you started to sort of, I guess, touch on COVID, and certainly would be hard pressed to not, albeit maybe just briefly talk about that. Certainly dynamic landscape would be the understatement, perhaps of the century in regards to all things COVID. And I can only imagine that the challenges that, someone such as your position, I mean, I can tell you for me, and, as part of my role instructing law enforcement officers on, for example, the regulations under the Reopening Ontario Act, which is as quick as you think you understand it, the next day it changes. So again, that's only scratching the surface, I would imagine, what's happening in the mayor's office. And to that effect, I guess where I'm trying to arrive at, there certainly is a sentiment, the sign of a true leader, if it will perhaps, reveal itself, if you will, is how they navigate the landscape of a crisis. Obviously, the pandemic, to call it a crisis, again, very much an understatement. So I'm wondering what lessons, and I know you started to sort of talk upon it, at least as far as the landscape with social media, things of its nature, but certainly curious to peel back the layers a bit more and discuss what lessons, if any, you've learned from the current pandemic, I guess, going on over a year, maybe going on a year and a half now, and how you're trying to navigate that.
Well, I'll tell you, calm seas never made for a skilled sailor. And I've learned I find everything in life, and especially the bad things, actually turn out to be some of the greatest lessons. And I appreciate the fact you're in law enforcement. So both of my brothers are in law enforcement too. One's a Toronto police officer, one's a Hamilton police officer. And what a tough time to be a cop in what's happening in the world, and tough time to be a politician. It's a really challenging time. Matter of fact, I called the mayor of Milton not long ago just to feel him out. Now, Gordon Krantz has been the mayor for 40 years. 40 years, the longest serving mayor in Canadian history, actually longer than Hazel McCallion now by a couple of years. Yeah. And I said, Gord, you've been around, you've seen it all. I mean, look how many years, 40 years. I said, how would you compare COVID to anything in the past, from 9/11 to whatever? And he said, oh my God, nothing's even close. Nothing could prepare you for this. You just hope along the way you picked up enough tools with all the different things that your toolbox is going to give you the skills you need to navigate through it. And it definitely has not necessarily brought out the best in people, but wherever there are problems, there are lessons. And as long as you focus on the silver lining. So there's gray clouds everywhere. I'm always seeking out the silver lining. So even 2 years ago, just over two and a half years ago, I had cancer. I was diagnosed with lymphoma, and it was tough. It was leading into an election year. I've got 3 teenagers, single dad. I got a lot of things on my plate, and trying to deal with something like that. But I'll tell you something. It helped me to realize how lucky I am. I'm surrounded by incredible people that were there when I couldn't step up. They stepped up for me. And it's when things go wrong that you appreciate when things were right that you took for granted. So I'll tell you something. Now, where before maybe I'd complain because all the milk was gone or the eggs were gone and nobody told me. Sure. Now I'm grateful my kids are healthy enough to eat, and where maybe they didn't clean something up. I'm grateful. You know what? Houses to be lived in and to have good memories. Who cares? No one's going to say, boy, his house was always neat, that guy. No one's going to say that as one of my great traits. It's going to be he was a good dad or he wasn't a good dad. And, and all this type of thing. And same with COVID. I'll tell you something. Sometimes you don't truly appreciate something until you lose it. And when you lose the opportunity to go to a concert, go to a restaurant, patio bar, movies, hang out with family, friends, travel, get on a plane, go somewhere, when those are taken away, that's when you really appreciate them the most. So in a way, I'd say the blessing of this whole craziness is that we've come to appreciate the stuff we took for granted. And now crossing the border is something we can't wait to do again, even if it's just to go have some chicken wings and pizza. But regardless, it's something that we just took for granted as a right. And it's not. It's a privilege. Everything in life's a privilege. And you come to really appreciate more now. And I hear people all the time now the simple little things that, like, after you have a cold and you can't taste things and then you can taste them again, you appreciate again. And same with this. So the upside to the downside is that I think we're going to be a lot more grateful. I hope it lasts long. I know humans seem to adapt quickly, but I hope we won't lose some of these lessons. Just like when you talk to your grandparents, they talked about the wars and the depression,
Sure.
and they had these lessons that they took throughout their entire life. And I know, like my grandparents, both my grandfathers were World War I veterans. And how they'd always skimp, and they wouldn't waste anything. And then my parents became that way, and I'm to a degree that way too, because I appreciate what it's like to struggle. And I struggled through my different businesses. People think as soon as you own a business you're successful. It's like oftentimes you're the last person to get paid, and
Sure.
and you're wondering, how am I going to make payroll this week, and how am I going to pay my accounts payable, and how am I going to collect my receivables, and whatever the case may be. But the fact is that when you go through these tough times, it builds character, builds thicker skin, acclimatizes you to challenges coming up. And I think it makes you a better leader. So I think when you put somebody through that mill, they come out a different person, and I think a better person.
Excellent. Well, Mayor, I tell you what, certainly you've been absolutely insightful, transparent, which is always, appreciated well, and obviously so very gracious with your time. And sort of my, I guess, famous or infamous parting question. And again, a true appreciation. There's never any sort of magic told to say, hey, take this or do X, Y, and Z, and you'll be able to rise to whatever successive role, rank, or whatever the case is you'd like. But, maybe if I can pose it this way, if there's anything that's been tried and tested for you that you would offer to anyone as advice or insight, should they want to put it into play to, again, try to realize maybe next strides in their career or even their personal life to that effect as well. The floor is yours, sir.
Well, I could be here all day, honestly, Brian.
Oh,
I've
sure.
been so blessed to have so many great mentors and so many great lessons. And so I'll think about my kids. I always ask my kids, what do you want people to say about you when you're not there? How do you want them to talk about you? And I said, I want people to know that when I said something, I did it and I meant it, that I wasn't afraid to apologize when I was wrong, that I always looked for the good in everything, even in the bad, that I was always supportive of other people. I want people to say he was humble. He was quick to admit his weakness and his faults, and quick to try to learn and listen. Because when you're talking like I am right now, I'm not learning anything. It's when I'm listening that I'm learning. And the other thing is, you got to have fortitude. You can't be lazy. You got to plan your work, then work your plan, but you got to know that there's work involved. And it's not always the most talented person that's successful. Oftentimes it's just the hardest working. And that's one thing when people ask how I'm doing, I always say I'm up or I'm getting up. I'm never down. I'm never down. I'm too stupid to stay down. And I'm smart enough to admit that I'm too stupid. So I think, and surround yourself with people, and don't be afraid to ask questions, because many people have gone before you and they've already made the mistakes. So ask them. And so it's one of my favorite things that I do when I meet people who've been successful at whatever it is. It could have just been raising their kids. It could have just been at training a dog. It could have been running a business. It doesn't matter, whatever it was. And I always say, sum it up for me. And I did that to Gordon Krantz too, for being the mayor. I go, sum it up for me, Gord. What's the key? And I'll do that to the woman who was our babysitter for our kids when they were young. Sum it up for me, Cindy. And they are quick to give you advice. And it's amazing that they went through all these years and they could sum it up in a couple of sentences. So I don't need to make mistakes. I just need to know what I need to do. And so the answers are all out there. And the last thing I'll say is, and I learned this too from Nick Wallenda, when we were able to pull off him walking across the falls. And a pretty exciting thing that we did. And I can't tell you how many people said this will never happen. You're wasting your time. And I love when people tell me why things won't happen. It doesn't deflate my balloon. It gives me all the more strength to journey on. And his thing was always never give up. Never, ever give up. That's the only time you fail. That's the only time you really lose, is when you give up. So I tell people, plan your journey and never give. And it's just like planning a trip somewhere. There might be road construction, bad weather along the way. There's going to be challenges. So you have a choice. It's like watching an ant. You put a pencil in front of an ant. The ant doesn't stop. The ant goes around it, goes over it, goes under it. The ant doesn't stop. And same with us. You have to decide. Start with the end in mind. I won't stop until I get to my destination. And if you make that resolve, you will get there 100%. You don't know exactly how and exactly when, but you will get there and you will be successful, because it all starts up here.
Excellent. Well, Mayor Jim Diodati, I thank you so very kindly, obviously, for your passion, for all your insightful advice, and of course, for each and every one of you watching out there. We thank you for tuning in. Once again, special thanks to the Mayor of Niagara Falls, Jim Diodati, for joining us. And we'll see you on the next episode of Calling All Leaders.
Thanks, Brian.